Oceanside communities get some of the most turbulent weather in Canada, subject to sudden snowstorms, heavy rains, and high winds. These forces can drastically alter the lives of residents when unpredictable conditions lead to disaster. Halifax, Nova Scotia. It presides over one of the world's great natural harbors. And because of its location, it has some of the most turbulent weather in the country.
We're living right at the coastline, and we're exposed to the open ocean. That gives us a vulnerability that an inland city does not have. Nothing we can do about the hazard. A hurricane is a natural hazard. What we have to do is try to make sure that the natural hazard doesn't lead to a natural disaster.
Hurricanes that have reached the city have been few. The most devastating one happened in 1893, giving Haligonians a false sense of security.
In the experience of most Atlantic Canadians, hurricanes typically do one of two things. They either weaken and die, or they veer off out somewhere into the Atlantic and they don't affect us.
In late September of 2003, people in Halifax are enjoying the still beautiful summer weather. Anne-Marie Tucker lives in a friendly working-class neighborhood with her children and her husband, Sean.
Everybody knows everybody, the good and the bad, and there's always lots of kids, lots of pools, lots of sprinklers and barbecues going, parties on the weekend, you know, people sitting out in the sun on their porch in their chairs.
Down the street from the Tuckers live the Amro family. Billy and his wife, Mary, have 3 small children, Samia, Anna, and Zachary.
Mary was beautiful, loved her kids, always with her kids, both of them, her and Billy, constantly with their kids.
We was a happy family, that's one thing. We get along with everybody. Every day we have fun, a lot of fun, me and my wife. We was very happy and very close. We have a lot of love, a lot of care.
On September 27, 2003, reports of an approaching hurricane start appearing. Even though Hurricane Juan is on a direct course with Halifax, few are concerned. People in the city have heard this before, and for many who have never lived through such a storm, the thought of a hurricane is nothing more than an exciting novelty.
And we watched it coming and we all went, isn't that neat? A real hurricane coming here.
Bruce McCullough is a photographer and former sailor who has lived in Halifax his entire life. He shares his home with his wife Dorothy and 4-year-old daughter Emma, a home just right for a man of the sea.
It's just perfect for me because we're right on the water. It never really bothered me being this close to the water. I mean, you can literally fall off my deck and into the water.
Bruce, along with many other Haligonians, is expecting Hurricane Juan to either change course or be very weak by the time it reaches shore. He tells Dorothy that the hurricane is nothing more than the media crying wolf. Bruce watches the evening news to see how wrong the reports have been. But outside, the wind is picking up.
There was a high overcast started coming in, and then it got thicker and thicker, and it was sort of blowing but a warm wind. 15, 20 knots, nothing serious. So Emma went to bed at her usual time, around 8 o'clock or 8:30, and Dorothy and I were still up, and we're talking about going to bed, and I said, well, I'll just sit down here and look out the window and watch it, you know.
Weather experts are much more concerned. What began 24 hours earlier as a tropical depression near Bermuda is heading on a straight line for Halifax and growing stronger as it gets closer. The waters near Nova Scotia are 2 to 3 degrees warmer than usual. It is now certain that Hurricane Juan won't change course and won't be weak when it reaches land.
And on Saturday, which is the day before it actually made landfall, it was becoming clear that it was going to make landfall. By 9 o'clock tonight, we had declared a state of local emergency, and that was before the storm even hit.
Meanwhile, emergency medical workers are gearing up for the event. Robert Boudreau has been a paramedic in Halifax for years, a tough and demanding job.
It's a 12-hour shift. There are quite a few challenges in a busy evening. Your first call could be something as simple as taking an elderly person from a nursing home into a hospital, or your first call of the evening could be for a sudden infant death. So mentally, you have to stay focused.
Paramedics always work in teams of 2. Robert's partner of 5 years is John Rossiter.
He was a fun-loving guy, you know, like you could really enjoy working a 12-hour shift with John, because just like our job, he was as spontaneous as our job is. John was probably one of the most devoted paramedics that I've ever known to the profession.
Before starting his shift, John calls his father to tell him about the coming storm. But John's father is a retired fire chief who knows that natural events can get out of hand.
One of the things that he said to John was, you know, be safe. John's response to his father was, well, Dad, you know, you did a similar job for how many years and nothing ever happened to you, I'll be safe.
Unlike many in the city, Robert and John are taking the hurricane seriously. Robert's shift is ending, but John has volunteered to work overtime. It isn't long before John is sent out. Meanwhile, Robert is starting to feel the storm build.
As much as my heart was out there with the guys that were working that night, I was also glad to be home with my wife and my 3 children.
By 10 p.m., Bruce McCullough realizes that winds are severe. But it's how the winds affect the water that has him worried, creating high waves called a storm surge.
It started to really come on. I was more worried about the storm surge. They were calling for possibly a large storm surge up to a meter or a meter and a half. And you know how close we are to the water, and then that could be quite dangerous.
Soon, there is more trouble. Power starts to go out across Halifax.
You could see the lights slowly going out. Looking down at Halifax, you see a block of lights just disappear, and then another block would disappear.
Bruce's house plunges into darkness just as he hears a knock at his door. Halifax's Emergency Measures Organization, a group formed to handle disasters, has asked the fire department to begin evacuating homes.
The fire department knocked on the door and said they're calling for a volunteer evacuation. If you don't like it here, they've opened the LeBrun Center, which is the local hockey rink, and you can go up and stay up there.
But Bruce is still not convinced, and even the fire department downplays the seriousness.
And we're going, well, no problem. And the guy says, yeah, I don't think so either. It seems to be the worst of it.
Bruce continues to watch the water levels. But once again, it's the wind that gets his attention. His thoughts go to his 4-year-old daughter.
We were hoping she'd sleep through it, and we thought we might possibly be able to not pay attention to it. But when the wind started to really come up, it was crashing around a lot. The trees were banging on the house.
From his window, Bruce sees trees and branches flying through the air. He knows he has misjudged the storm.
There was so much debris flying around in the air. You could see things, 2x4s and whatnot blowing around, and shingles and bits of roofing. Of course, woke Emma up. So Emma came downstairs, and it blew harder and harder, and they kept saying, well, this got to be the end of the wind, and it would blow harder again.
September 28th, 2003. The winds are now 120 kilometers per hour. Waves are 6 meters high in the harbor. Instead of dying, Hurricane Juan is turning into the strongest storm Halifax has seen in decades. Then, just before 1 a.m., it finally hits Bruce McCullough's house head on.
So we moved out of this part of the house and we moved to the part that had a second floor over it and pulled all the doors shut around us, put the cushions on the floor and sat there. And that's where we stayed.
Then, within moments, there is a sudden, eerie calm. Bruce believes the storm has passed and they are all safe.
And it got fainter and fainter, and I came over and looked outside and I said, it's dying. It must have gone past already. And I said, see, it wasn't that bad.
Bruce soon realizes that his family is anything but safe.
And I looked up and I could see stars. And I said, it's that bad. Because, you know, a hurricane is a couple of 100 miles wide. And the only one place you're going to see stars if you know you're anywhere near the hurricane is right in the middle.
The McCullough family is now in the 16-kilometer eye of the storm, surrounded by violent, whirling walls of wind. Bruce knows that when the eye moves on, they will be hit by the other side of the hurricane, and that side is usually the most violent.
And then it started to blow from exactly the opposite direction. And the spray was coming up onto the windows. And just about then was the first time we heard that first really loud thump.
Not knowing what to think, Bruce goes to check on the sound and can't quite believe what he sees.
So I went downstairs and I was expecting to see perhaps a lawn chair through the window. I opened the sliding door downstairs and I looked out and I could see the bow of a boat.
The wind and high waters have pushed a 9-meter boat through Bruce's house.
And then I went into the bedroom and the whole corner was out of the wall and you could actually see the hull through the wall. Every time the wave lifts it up and smashes it against the side of the house, the whole house shook.
At Robert Boudreau's home, his family is trying to cope with the violence surrounding them.
I was with them throughout the entire night. It was quite a tremendous night. I mean, I had three children that certainly didn't sleep through it.
Then, shortly after 1 a.m., Robert gets a phone call. He assumes he is called to duty.
I was pretty sure that they were going to say, you know, there are some people injured, or, you know, or things have gotten really busy out there and we need you to work.
But nothing can prepare Robert Boudreau for the information he receives.
The call was to tell me that one of the paramedics had been fatally injured in an accident. You think, well, who was it? You know, is it somebody that I knew really, really well?
It is someone Robert has been very close to for years. Robert learns his partner, John Rossiter, is dead.
And then to find out that it was somebody that you were partnering with for 5 years, that's quite an impact.
While driving in the storm, John's van is hit by a tree and he is crushed.
They had just dropped off a patient. They were leaving there and they were going up, you know, the block, and that tree came down across the ambulance.
In a while, the storm moves inland and dissipates. In a matter of hours, Halifax has been changed forever. But for one young family, tragedy is yet to strike. At 1 a.m. on September 29, 2003, Halifax, Nova Scotia is hit with the strongest hurricane in decades. The morning after Hurricane Juan, the people of Halifax wake up to a scene that they have never experienced before.
It was the most unusual light when it finally started to get light. It was like the air had been mixed with brown paint. It was like the air was dirty and there wasn't a breath of wind. And you went outside and it was deadly silent. And there were just boats planted on people's lawns and up the driveways and all the way down. And all the wharfs had been taken out. And the cottages and the boathouses were all gone.
It was a war zone up there. To be out in the streets that day, like you would drive down streets that you drove down 1,000 times before, but you wouldn't recognize them. You'd think you were in the middle of the forest. because now all the trees were laying in the road.
More than 1 million trees are uprooted. The cleanup will require intense cooperation. As night falls, people in the Tuckers and Amrose neighborhood have gathered to share their stories about the hurricane. They have heard news reports about the hazards of using candles, but with the power still out, there is little choice. Later, the Tuckers return home and prepare for bed.
John had already gotten into bed, and we had had a couple candles going, and we made sure we put those out, and then he went upstairs, and then I got into bed, and I was just laying in bed, and it was so dark.
But that soon changes.
And then me and my parents woke up, and we just looked out the window, and all I could see was like redness on houses across the street. Like all I could see was brightness.
And I heard somebody screaming something, and I ran downstairs.
Within seconds, Anne-Marie sees it is the Amro house.
Then after that, I just remember screaming, "Sean, Mary's on fire, there's a house on fire." And he just took off out the front door. And so I ran outside down to the house. By this time, the front door had been kicked open, and the living room was just engulfed in flames.
Inside the house, Billy wakes from his sleep. In the thick smoke, he has trouble understanding what is happening. He doesn't know where the rest of his family is.
I open my eyes. I can't breathe. I can't get up off the bed. I can't get up completely. I can't see anything. And I don't know what's going on.
Billy senses one of his children at his side.
I grab, but I don't know who. I couldn't see it. When I felt the heat coming, I pulled more than I ever can pull. And I pulled it out the window.
In that span of seconds after I'd arrived, Billy was crawling out the front window upstairs, and the smoke at that point began really coming out. He pulled Anna out, and he let Anna drop. She came down tumbling, and we caught her, thank God, before she hit the ground. She had no real signs of life. Her eyes were really fixed and dilated, and I just said, I'm not going to let this happen. She had a moment, and then there was a bit of a flinch, some kind of a response. She started breathing.
But Mary, Samia, and Zachary are still inside. Billy finally leaps to the ground just as the fire trucks arrive. He and Anna are taken to the hospital.
And they assessed that it was too late to go in at that point.
In an overwhelming tragedy, Mary, Samia, and Zachary have all died from smoke inhalation. At the hospital, Billy wakes up to find out most of his family is gone.
I wake up, I see the lines going in my hands, the stuff going, oxygen, whatever here, and I try to rip them off, and everybody. I say, I'm gonna go get my family, I'm gonna go get my kids, I'm gonna go get my family still. And I scream loud as it could be.
When Billy is calm, he learns Sean Tucker has saved his daughter's life.
I don't know how much of Anna's life I can be credited with saving. I was just a vehicle for whatever higher power you believe in. I think anyone, just happened to be there at that time.
Immediately after it happened that very morning, a shrine was set up right in front of the house, and children brought toys down, and adults lit candles.
When it is all over, Hurricane Juan goes down as the city's most violent storm in decades. Halifax's beloved Point Pleasant Park is destroyed. Damage is in the millions. 8 people are dead.
When the storm arrived, people were taking the storm far too lightly. The emergency measures folks have a monumental task of getting the public to perceive these storms accurately. so that the public knows that they really do need to listen to EMO when EMO issues an evacuation order.
For those who lived through the terrible night of September 27, 2003, there are powerful lessons to be learned about the forces of nature. Something Robert Boudreau has to face when he sees John Rossiter's vehicle.
His truck is still at the station as if he's on duty. There's an ambulance in the bay, but there's no paramedics in it, and then all of a sudden it starts to kind of become real to you. Hurricane Juan took away a great deal from me. Took away a very good friend, almost a brother.
My kids had nightmares for weeks. They didn't want to go to bed at night.
Hurricane Juan changed the way we look at weather.
Tragedies like Halifax's Hurricane Juan are examples of how people are dramatically affected by nature. And because of these tragedies, people are more vigilant than ever, but there are still no guarantees.
We can build the world's greatest highways and the world's tallest buildings, and we can change the land, but when a storm blows through, that's all we can do is run and hide, because there's absolutely nothing we can do about it.